Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. It is Tuesday, October 10th at 10 a.m. and we are here today in docket number 2023-121E. This docket is to receive information and pursuant to South Carolina Code Annotated Section 58-27-265, where we are trying to identify regulatory challenges and opportunities associated with the electrification of the transportation sector. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin and Commissioner Kara Lee Williams. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. Before we begin, I just want to say where we are right now. We have a number of parties who filed to intervene in the docket. We have some public witnesses today. And the parties, those that have filed to intervene, will also be presenting witnesses. I would just like to note for the record that parties are those persons or entities who have filed a petition to intervene in the docket, and those petitions to intervene have been granted by the Commission. Public witnesses are interested persons who have not intervened in the docket but have an interest in the proceeding and have comments that they would like to make the Commission aware of. I'd like to note that public witnesses will be called this morning. They may present their comments. However, public witnesses may not represent any entity other than themselves. They may not cross-examine witnesses and may not pose objections to any testimony, witnesses, or other matters. So I know we've got some folks that aren't accustomed to being at the Commission, and so I just like everybody to be aware of what we do. I also note that Commissioner Kara Lee Williams has disclosed to the parties, those who intervened, that she was a moderator on a panel at CRUC, the Southeastern Association of Utility Regulatory Commissioners, back in June of this year. And participating on that panel was one of the witnesses, I think that's being presented by Duke. He was just a member of the panel. She was merely the moderator. I would note for the record that South Carolina Code Annotated Section 58-3-260H provides and allows commissioners that can participate in educational seminars sponsored by state, regional, or national organizations, and seminars not affiliated with any utility regulated by the Commission. As I stated, Commissioner Williams was just the moderator. She did not engage in outside discussions with any of the presenters on the panel regarding any issue that may be before us today. Nothing on the panel, nothing in the session addressed South Carolina or the issues that may be addressed today in that discussion. Commissioner Williams has disclosed this to the parties out of an abundance of caution, but she has indicated that she has no concern with being objective and believes that she can act in a fair and impartial manner with what's coming out of this docket. I note that really, as I view this docket, I know that the statute requires us to identify regulatory challenges and opportunities associated with the electrification of the transportation sector. I view this docket as really an information gathering session. There are not going to be any rates set in this docket. It is really to identify issues that we need to be aware of and that the parties need to be aware of as we move forward, like all other states, with the electrification issue. So I'd like to put that out there for the record. Now, let's take appearances from the parties, if we may. I've got I do know that we had a couple of parties that asked, due to scheduling conflicts, to be maybe taken a little bit out of order, and so we're trying to accommodate those. So let me just go through my list, and this is the order that I think we will proceed. If a party has an issue with this order, I ask that you talk to the other parties and get it worked out, and then notify me. So that we can proceed in as simple and clean manner as possible. I'm going to call on, just right now we're just taking appearances of the parties in council. The Electric Cooperatives of South Carolina and Central Electric Power Cooperative.
Madam Chair, Charlie Terraney and Chris Kuhn for the cooperatives, Electric Cooperatives of South Carolina and Central Electric Power Cooperative. Chris McDonald will join us virtually tomorrow if this proceeding continues then.
Thank you, Mr. Terraney. We will take public witnesses after the Electric Cooperative, and I'm just going to refer to Electric Cooperatives and Central Electric Power Cooperative as the Electric Cooperatives. We'll take public witnesses following the Electric Cooperatives, and I won't call those names right now. The next party I have is Americans for Affordable Clean Energy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tracy Green with Burr Foreman representing the Americans for Affordable Clean Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Walmart Incorporated. You're on.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Eaton. I'm here for Walmart. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eaton. Dominion Energy, South Carolina.
Good morning, Chair Belzer and members of the commission. I'm Chad Burgess. I'm in-house corporate counsel for Dominion Energy, South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. ChargePoint Incorporated is a party to this docket. However, their counsel, Mr. Adams, filed a notice yesterday asking to be excused, which was granted by a standing hearing officer, I think went out today. So Mr. Adams and ChargePoint are excused from the hearing. Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress.
Good morning, Chair Belzer, members of the commission. I'm Katie Brown. I'm here on behalf of Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress. Here with me this morning is Ashley Cooper of the firm Baker Donaldson.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and Vote Solar.
Good morning, Chair Belzer, members of the commission. I'm Kate Mixon on behalf of SACE, CCL, and Vote Solar, and with me today is my co-counsel, Emma Clancy.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. And Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Chad Torrey on behalf of ORS.
Thank you, Mr. Torrey. Did I miss any party? Well, then I'm very glad because I've had a little bit of trouble getting all the comments and testimonies together, so thank you very much. Is there anything that needs to come before, any preliminary matter that needs to come before the commission before we begin? Hearing none, recognize Mr. Terraney to present your witnesses. And as they're coming forward, anyone that's here, when you're called as a witness, you will come in front and sit in the table in the front when it's your turn to testify.
I'm going to swear you both in. I'm sorry. All right, if you'll raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Madam Chair, if it pleases the commission, I'd like to introduce the testimony of both witnesses and then allow them to give their summaries sequentially.
That's fine, Mr. Terraney.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Pauling. Could you state your name for the record and tell the commission what you do?
Mr. Pauling, I need for you to turn that microphone on, please, sir. Thank you. There you go. You're on.
It's on now. My driver's license name is Benny Robert Pauling, but I'm Bob Pauling. I'm the CEO of Mid-Carolina Electric Cooperative here in Lexington.
Mr. Pauling, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 10 pages of testimony that was pre-filed in this docket?
Yes, sir, I did.
Do you have any additions or corrections you wish to make to that testimony?
No, sir, I do not.
And did your testimony have two exhibits attached to it? An Exhibit A was a sample bill calculation. Exhibit B was a screenshot of an EV calculation.
That's correct. Those two exhibits were presented.
Any changes you need to make to those exhibits?
No, sir.
If I were to ask you the questions in your testimony today, would your answers be the same?
They sure would.
Madam Chair, I move to admit the direct testimony of Bob Pauling into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Pauling's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Good morning, Mr. Price.
Exhibits.
Oh, and I'd also move to admit the exhibits attached to Mr. Pauling's testimony, Exhibit A and Exhibit B.
Mr. Pauling's exhibits accompanying his pre-filed direct testimony will be marked for identification as hearing Exhibit 1 and received into the record of this case.
Good morning, Mr. Price.
Good morning.
Would you introduce yourself to the commission for us, please?
Similarly, my driver's license says James Coleman Price, but I go by Cole Price, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Member Services at Central Electric Power Cooperative.
And Ms. Price, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 5 pages of direct testimony introduced and pre-filed in this docket?
I did, yes.
Do you have any additions or corrections you wish to make to that testimony?
No, sir.
If I were to ask you the questions in the testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, I move to introduce the pre-filed direct testimony of Cole Price into the record.
Mr. Price's pre-filed direct testimony will be received into the record as if given from the stand.
Mr. Pauling, do you have a summary of your testimony for the commission?
Yes, sir.
Could you please give it to the presenter?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Good morning. On behalf of Mid-Carolina and all of our members in electric cooperatives, I really appreciate y'all listening and trying to understand this very complex thing of EVs that are coming fast toward us. But I'd like to share a little bit on behalf of the electric cooperatives of South Carolina, which I will refer to as statewide, if that's okay, and also Central Electric Power Cooperative that I will just refer to as Central. But I'd like to begin by telling you a little bit about me, myself, Mid-Carolina Electric Cooperative, the member-owned not-for-profit electric cooperative that I lead, and our relationship with statewide and Central. I believe this will help you understand our point of view on the issues that will be discussed today. I grew up down in St. Matthews, attended Clemson University, where I received a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering in 1985. I was a student athlete and actually played both football and baseball there and was a proud member of the 1981 National Championship team. I have to brag on that every chance I get, so I'm not sure if we'll ever win another one. But I've been in the electric cooperative arena for 38 plus years during my entire career. I began at McCall Thomas Engineering, a consulting firm down in Orangeburg, South Carolina, where I designed substations and power line distribution systems. Spent several years in power line equipment sales and product support. Then I became an operations engineer and a system engineer before spending the last 19 as CEO of electric cooperatives. The first term was down at Tri-County Electric Cooperative in St. Matthews, but I've been the CEO at Mid-Carolina Electric Cooperative for the last 11 years. We actually serve this building, so God forbid if the power should go out, I know who to call. I promise you that. So, hopefully that won't happen. But Mid-Carolina is a member-owned, not-for-profit electric distribution cooperative, and I spelled the word out, distribution, and I'll explain that later. We serve parts of Lexington, Richland, Saluda, Aiken, and Newberry counties, and we were established back in 1940. We serve nearly 60,000 accounts. We have over 4,400 miles of distribution lines, and we have 157 employees at 2 locations. Distribution meaning we don't own any or own or operate any generation or transmission assets. You got generation, transmission, distribution. We're the distribution end. We just receive power, distribute it to our membership. Mid-Carolina is a member of both statewide and Central. Statewide is the Service and Trade Association for the Electric Cooperatives of South Carolina. They provide legal support, professional development, lineman training, safety training, communication support, and most importantly, mutual aid during widespread outage restorations. And they also provide some regulatory services to the member cooperatives. Central is our not-for-profit generation and transmission cooperative that provides power to approximately 1/3 of South Carolina's population. They do this through the 20 electric distribution cooperatives that they serve. Central engages in the purchase, transmission, the sale of electric power to the cooperatives throughout the state, including Mid-Carolina. They also do planning, forecasting. They file PURPA and other regulatory documents for the member cooperatives. You can see a map of the South Carolina Electric Cooperatives, different colors that represent the different 20 cooperatives throughout the state. South Carolina's electric distribution cooperatives serve varied communities comprising almost 2/3 of the state's territory or landmass, including some of its most economically challenged areas. If you look at the map down the right side, the eastern side, the I-95 corridor is served mostly by electric cooperatives. Starts up at the North Carolina line, you got Marlboro Electric Co-op, and then PD, and then Santee, and coming on down through the state, Tri-County, Edisto, Coastal, and Palmetto Co-op down in Jasper County going down into Georgia. Just wanted to point that out because we're talking about different economically challenged parts of the state. And through our relationship with Central, we conduct annual surveys of members to gauge their interest in EVs so that we may develop strategies to help meet their needs. As member-owned, not-for-profit organizations, our sole priority is to serve our members safely, reliably, and at a reasonable cost. We must also fairly allocate cost of service among our members. Please understand that Mid-Carolina is not pro nor anti-EV, and Mid-Carolina does not attempt to influence members one way or the other on the purchase of electric vehicles. We provide education on electric vehicles, especially the potential impact on their power bill, much like we have done for solar for the past decade. For example, at Mid-Carolina, we've partnered with a company called Choose EV to provide our members with information about owning electric vehicles. On our Mid-Carolina Electric Vehicle Information website, members can learn facts about charging information and more on EVs. Most importantly, they can access Mid-Carolina's rate-specific calculator to estimate the cost of charging an electric vehicle on their monthly power bill. While Cole and I have addressed each of the topics requested by the Commission in our pre-filed testimony, I'd like to focus my summary on 3 areas which I consider especially significant: demand charges, minimizing cross-subsidization, and rate design. First of all, demand charges. Demand charges collect the portion of the cost of facilities that provide service to any load on our system. We have to have transformers, we have to have poles, wire, conductor, all those facilities to actually provide service to any load, including an EV charger. I'd like to point out that the demand component of our overall expenses at Mid-Carolina is around 53%. 50% of our overall cost is directly related to demand. EV's fast charging stations typically sell little energy compared to their power demand, so I see no way to avoid demand charges or some comparable mechanism without cross-subsidization from our membership at large. Next topic, avoiding cross-subsidization. It's imperative for electric cooperatives. It would be unfair to require a member of an electric cooperative who does not drive an EV to subsidize charging at any level. It has been suggested that increased EV load could create downward rate pressure. Under ideal circumstances, possibly, could possibly be the case. But in South Carolina, we already need more capacity to meet projected load, and in certain system conditions, such as last Christmas, we are already short on capacity. The additional load from EVs could just as plausibly cause upward pressure on rates, especially with level 3 fast charging, by increasing the need to build even more baseload generation that we were already short on. Electric cooperatives have no incentive to cross-subsidize their members into the entry of the EV market because we are not-for-profit entities. What electric cooperatives do in the EV sector must solely be driven by the needs of our local members. Now let's talk about rates. Rates should be simple and transparent. However, the cost of generating and delivering energy is not linear. It does not support a single flat volumetric kilowatt-hour rate. Consumers understand and can benefit from price signals, especially when supported by clear and effective communication from their electric provider. For example, Mid-Carolina has a 3-part rate structure. It's cost-based. Our residential members pay an account charge equivalent to the cost of making power available. That's about 15% of our overall cost, an account charge. In other words, if a member doesn't use any electricity at all, we still got to generate a bill. We got to read the meter. We got to have member service reps. We got to have all the systems back office to support that member's account. So we call this the account charge. Again, overall, it's about 15% of our overall cost. Next is the energy charge. The energy is measured in kilowatt hours, and it's basically a volumetric rate of 5.15 cents per kilowatt hour, no matter when that kilowatt hour is used. We read the bill at the beginning of the month or the billing period. At the end of the billing period, we just send basically a kilowatt hour charge for that usage. And that's about 38% of our overall cost. Again, account charge 15%, Energy charges about 38% of our overall cost. The third component in our cost is demand. And we call it on peak because people understand on peak versus demand. Demand is a very complex thing to try to explain to someone. So anyhow, the energy is measured on our peak hours. We have peak hours in the mornings when it's cold for 3 hours from 6 to 9 a.m. We have peak hours in the evening from 4 to 7 p.m. when it's hot. And the highest 1 hour peak charge is registered and the bill is sent multiplied by $12 per kW. And that, again, recovers our demand charge. Again, back to my point earlier, that's about 53% of our overall expenses. The energy charge, I'd like to point out that the energy charge and on-peak charge are also multiplied by a monthly adjustment factor derived from the monthly forecast of expenses and revenue needed to cover our fluctuating power costs. For example, our power bill at Mid-Carolina in August was the highest in the history of Mid-Carolina. It was $9.6 million. So what we do when that forecast is lower than what the power cost actually is, we incrementally increase rates that next month and vice versa. When the power bill is lower than anticipated, we lower rates. So it fluctuates back and forth to reduce the impact to our members. Many of our members like having the choice to control their monthly bills by adjusting how much energy used, but even more importantly, when they use it. Members who choose to do nothing receive bills comparable to traditional volumetric rates. Communication is key. For example, you can see we provide an interactive sample monthly bill on our website that explains each charge. Our member services teams are well prepared to discuss the nuances of these billing components with our members. I would venture to say that Mid-Carolina is as transparent with our bill presentation as any utility in the country. A sample bill is attached as Exhibit A to my testimony. With traditional energy-only volumetric rate structure, the only way a consumer to reduce their electric bill is to use less energy or less kilowatt hours. That can be significantly difficult for an EV driver. Charging an EV can add 500 plus kilowatt hours a month to a residential bill. However, with the three-part rate, cost-based rate, like Mid-Carolina's, it is possible to consume more energy but have a lower electric bill by charging during the off-peak hours. The three-part rate lets the EV driver charge at home in the off-peak hours for one of the least expensive fill-ups in the state, 5.15 cents per kilowatt hour. Conversely, if the member chooses to charge their car during the 3-hour on-peak window, he or she may add as much as $120 or more to their monthly power bill. And that's, again, slides 4 and 5, which is directly off of our website, our Choose EV website. On our website, we provide a calculator that estimates the costs and savings associated with owning an EV and shows the cost difference of charging during on and off-peak hours. The sample calculation is attached. In closing, I'd like to make it clear that electric cooperatives do not oppose EVs nor DC fast chargers installations at all. We're here to serve our members. As they adopt EVs, we will be there to support them just as we would for any other technology. Thank you for having me today, and I'll be glad to answer any questions anyone may have.
Mr. Price, could you present a summary of your testimony for the Commission?
Yes, sir. Good morning. I also thank you for allowing me to appear before you on behalf of Statewide and Central. As I said, my name is Cole Price, and I'm in member services at Central. Central was formed in 1948 to serve as the generation and transmission provider to South Carolina's electric cooperatives. Central allows the electric cooperatives to achieve an economy of scale that they would not have individually. Central and the cooperatives have approximately 80,000 miles of power lines and operate in all 46 counties in South Carolina. The state's 20 electric distribution cooperatives are Central's members, and Central is also a member of Statewide. A little bit about my background. I graduated from the University of Wisconsin at Platteville with a degree in electrical engineering in 1994, and later on in my career, earned an MBA from AICU. I have a diverse background in utility planning with a focus on rate making. I have spent all of my professional career working for electric utilities across the Midwest and Southeast, primarily at the wholesale level. I have been with Central for over 7 years now. In my summary, I will focus on 3 topics that I believe are especially relevant to this proceeding: Central's experience with managed charging, capacity maps, and the triennial transportation electrification plans that have been proposed by some parties to this docket. Central supports member cooperatives through research, development, and deployment of load management programs. Central has conducted 2 pilot programs specific to the management of EV charging. The first such pilot focused on controlling EV charging through the EV charging stations directly, which were deployed on residential member premises. The pilot identified many challenges in communicating and controlling the EV charging stations due to hardware and software malfunctions, and these challenges informed the development of our second pilot. In the second pilot, we partnered with OptiWatt, which is an app that utilizes vehicle telematics. This app allows EV users to manage their charging and sign up or opt in to a utility demand response program that issues control events during peak periods. While this pilot is ongoing, the initial results indicate that this approach provides significantly more benefit than the original pilot and gives member consumers a mechanism to opt out of individual control events. In addition to being able to directly manage EV charging through the app, users can optimize their charging based on cooperative rates, such as Mid-Carolina's 3-part rate. This gives EV users the ability to control their own cost by avoiding higher price periods. There have been recommendations for utilities to provide capacity maps. Due to the nature of our system, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for Central and the electric cooperatives to maintain current and accurate capacity maps. Central neither owns or operates the distribution substations, nor do we operate the bulk transmission system. Central builds radial transmission lines from the bulk transmission system to over 750 member delivery points. Developing and maintaining capacity maps would require significant coordination with the bulk transmission suppliers and each of the 20 member cooperatives to compile this information and then ensure it is kept up to date. Given the dynamic nature of the electric system, the cost of ensuring models are up to date would be significant. The modeling is impacted by each new load that comes onto the system, as well as when generation or transmission infrastructure is added. With the growth that we have seen in the states, the models can become outdated very quickly. As others have stated in their initial comments to this docket, it would not just be EV stakeholders that would utilize these maps, but other market participants that would further add to the complexity of keeping the maps current. There may be an opportunity for the development and maintenance of a utility directory for non-utility participants that has the contact information for appropriate points of contacts for utility employees to avoid some of the frustration with navigating utility chains of command. Providing this information could likely remove one barrier to entry for non-utility participants. Lastly, I believe that triennial electrification plans would duplicate the work of our integrated resource plans. Central works with each of the 20 member cooperatives to develop load forecasts, and with the growth of EVs, many cooperatives have begun factoring in the impacts of EV growth into their forecasts. The 20 forecasts then roll up to the central system forecast, which serves as the basis for our integrated resource plan. Other suggested components of the TEP such as rate design and incentive programs, would be handled directly by each distribution cooperative. Some of our electric cooperatives are small and all operate on thin margins, and I don't believe TEPs will produce enough information to justify the work that they would require. Thank you again for allowing me to testify. I will be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Madam Chair, the parties,
Thank you.
tender the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Torini. Americans for Affordable Clean Energy, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Walmart,
No questions, thank you.
Dominion Energy,
No questions.
Duke,
No questions.
Say CCL Vote Solar,
No questions.
ORS.
No questions.
Commissioners, questions for this panel?
Chair Belzer?
Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. I appreciate your engagement here. I'm probably going to start with questions for Mr. Pauling, but certainly look forward to answers from both of you.
Sure.
I'm going to start with the tension between demand charges and alternatives. And Mr. Pauling, in your testimony just now, and I think in your written testimony, you talk about comparable mechanisms. but obviously we're getting testimony saying avoid demand charges, and obviously we don't want subsidization. But what do you think are those comparable mechanisms? And if you said them and I missed them, I apologize.
No, I didn't offer any. I just said that the utilities, and see, we're different because we're a distribution cooperative. In other words, we receive power and we distribute it. If you look at an integrated system that generates, transmits, distributes all the way down to the meter, their cost structure is much different. But for an electric cooperative, we just can't avoid demand charges. Let me explain a little bit about what demand charges are. There are actually two components of that. One is demand charges is directly based on our wholesale power cost. In other words, how big is Mid-Carolina's slice of the pie during a system coincident peak? We pay that demand charge per kW. And then the other one is our local distribution demand charge. Within our boundaries, within our system, we have transformers, we have poles, we have wires, we have conductors, all those things that we have to actually provide whatever power a member needs at their meter. So there is some demand charge within our cooperative because we have to, again, maintain that system, build that system and whatnot. But a comparable that I'm talking about is just another fully integrated utility may be able to use something but they all have to be time-based of some sort. It's got to be, there's a different cost of power during extreme temperature, extreme loading than it is offloading. Like a day like today when it's beautiful, 73 degrees outside, it doesn't make any difference. It literally doesn't. But on a day when it's extremely hot, extremely cold, it needs to be some reward for that on peak extra cost of delivering that energy and the energy itself. Again, I don't have a solution to that. Mid-Carolina, we have cost-based three-part rates. We don't mind anything the member does on their side of the meter. Our cost-based rates makes sure that they pay their fair share and other members don't subsidize it. But a flat kilowatt-hour volumetric rate, in my opinion, will not work for any kind of EV charging. Matter of fact, I'll go another step further. From my board, my perspective, and my Mid-Carolina board perspective, we have an issue if someone gets a reduced rate on our system to charge their EV if we were on volumetric rates. Our rates are set up such as if a single mom wants to wash her clothes, she can do it off peak for the same price that someone can charge their EV. And for me, that's on equal footing, and that's how it should be.
So are you saying that it doesn't matter to you if it's a demand charge or if it's a incentive or a disincentive in rates?
Well, what I'm saying is, demand charge has different connotations, but there's got to be a higher cost to charge that or do anything during a peak time period than it is off peak.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah, I'm not smart enough rate making to understand that. We've had our three-part cost-based rates in place for about 7 years, again, and we're indifferent to what the member does on the other side of the meter.
Thank you. Okay. You may have answered some of my other questions because you say active managed charging programs and passive programs that encourage consumer behavior could be effective.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where you and I are going with the rate charges can impact and tell your consumer, give them the choice.
That's correct,
Is that
Commissioner
correct?
Williams. Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
And you talk a little bit about capacity maps, but I think your peer does as well. Is part of the issue proprietary information, or is it more just the accuracy and the time it takes?
Yeah, this is Cole.
Thank you.
Most of it is, in my opinion, most of it is having the ability to keep it up to date. I mean, we could do this, and we face this challenge without EVs. We face this challenge in economic development for the co-ops. Everybody who wants a site wants to know the best location, And it's very difficult to keep up with all the changes that are happening on the system, just based on the growth that we see and the coordination between so many different players. We are served in the Duke Balancing Authority and in the Santee Cooper Balancing Authority. So those are two different bulk transmission providers that we'd have to interact with, as well as Dominion, and then the distribution cooperatives downstream. There's constant growth, and keeping those accurate and being held accountable to that level of accuracy is a significant challenge.
You just said something, Mr. Price, that piqued my curiosity. You compared the challenge to dealing with economic development. And some of the testimony in this docket talks about like a window, or I would call it a computer program that lets you look at a site and evaluate, what your costs are going to be to upgrade there versus another. Is there a tool like that for economic development?
It's the same systems. They're generally just larger sites.
Right. And is there a tool like that for a Volvo or a Boeing or a whatever the next flavor is that wants to come to South Carolina? Do they have the ability to privately go online and look at options?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. It just strikes me if we can't do it for economic development, it's going to be pretty challenging to do it for EVs.
Yeah,
I appreciate the comparison. Okay, I'm going to let you talk.
As an antidote, we had a cooperative who wanted to site, say, 10 megawatts at a substation because their substation had 20 megawatts capacity, but the transmission system only supported 4, and they didn't know that because it's upstream. So those are the types of challenges that you face. The local co-op knows what their system is, but the system above it may not be able to handle it.
May I also add one thing, Commissioner Williams? From a distribution system perspective, it is a living, breathing, dynamic system that changes rapidly. We feed lines from one direction. 2 weeks later, we may feed them from the other direction. So when somebody comes to us and asks about the capacity at a certain location, we will do all those calculations. We'll work with them the best we can. But to put a map out there that says, hey, we got 3 megawatts here, we got 5 megawatts here, it may be good for that snapshot in that instant in time, but then 2 days later it's outdated.
Is it even a rule of thumb? 2 days later?
I think it's almost entirely a case-by-case basis.
This probably is for Mr. Price, if we did have hosting capacity maps, would it become an economic development incentive?
I'm not sure I understand the intent of the question.
I'm not sure about the intent, but my question is my curiosity is if we had hosting capacity maps in South Carolina that had some access to potential economic development operators, would it be advantageous?
So, and I'll say this in the context of economic development and EV charging. If an industry for economic development, if a DC fast charger for EV comes to the co-ops, they work with us and we try to identify, when I think of EVs charging, especially DC fast charging, the people that operate and maintain and deploy those types of systems are the best suited to understand where's the best location. So then coordinating through us to understand what the cost is to serve that location, we do that every day, and that applies to economic development as well. Obviously, electricity is not the only thing associated with economic development. There's water, jobs, everything else. But we work with all invested stakeholders at every level, from economic development down to EV charging, to get them the information that they need and to hopefully make it cost effective to make the projects work.
And I think I'm just asking, if you had a tool like a hosting capacity map, would it help modernize, facilitate communication with economic development?
Potentially, yes. I would be concerned about the risk I would say that we've looked to make sure that we're aware of the capacity at some of the more preferred economic development sites. And there's a lot across the cooperative territory. We've had to scale it back because we can't keep up and maintain the data and the information on that many sites. So we've scaled it back to the top 5 sites, and even that can be a challenge at times, given the dynamic nature of growth in the state right now.
Mr. Pauling and Mr. Price, I may have other questions, but I'm gonna kind of stand down and thank you and allow some of my other colleagues to ask questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Caston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Mr. Pauling, I do remember you.
How about
In fact, if you have any eligibility left.
I could have made that 29-yarder, by the way.
I bet you could. That said, relative to, I guess, along the lines of what Commissioner Williams was asking you, again, I'm familiar with water distribution, sewer distribution maps, and generally it flows in one direction. It can change, but generally flows in one direction. And we have maps, GIS data, and models associated with that. So you could put a demand here or here. You could constantly model it. And we generally knew where the areas may be most likely to have growth. Anything remotely similar with electrical distribution or grid?
Our GIS system and our meter data management system and our load profiles, all that's tied together in our system modeling. So we know voltage issues, we know where we got conductor issues, we keep our system updated. We model transformer loading. If a transformer is too small, we make it larger or vice versa. So we have all those things in place. But unlike water that usually flows downhill or sewer unless you pump it up, electricity, again, is dynamic. For the most part, our system stays static and it flows from the substation down feeders. Every now and then you have to turn it around. But we do know the capacity on our different feeders and our substations and downline devices and conductor size. So we know all that. And when somebody comes to us and wants to add a load on our system, whatever it may be, of course we have to look at all that and make sure we can supply their needed load. But having this as something that's publicly viewed or whatnot it'd be very difficult. I just say it'd be virtually impossible to have our distribution system out there from a capacity standpoint for someone to, hey, I want to put a charger here. If somebody wants to put a charging station somewhere, come to us. We got engineers meet with them. We know the capacity values and possibility of what system upgrades we need to make and those type things. So, but we do have all that integrated in our GIS and meter data management and our system modeling software.
That's good to know, and I certainly understand that.
Yeah.
As former utility manager, that we were not inclined to just.
Correct.
There's wisdom to not doing some things. The dilemma we have, I guess, is what's the best way? What's the best way to protect the security of your system? And even if it's not a security issue, as you say, it fluctuates so. Mm-hmm. And if I understood you correctly, you said what's available upstream you don't always know.
That's correct. Again, we know the capacity of our substation transformers. We know the amperage, available amperage, and the capacity of our distribution lines, and that's what limits things. But again, if a large load comes, we have to reach back beyond our substation, above substation to central to say, hey, what transmission capacity, and they have to reach back to the generating station. So it flows back upstream as you portray in the same matter. But if someone wants, and we're putting in fast chargers right now on our system. We're working with folks right now to put them. But the way that evolves is they come to us and say, hey, I want to put a fast charger at this location. So what we do is we say, oh, let's see what we can do for you. where's the nearest three-phase line? What's the capacity there? And here's just what's involved in go ahead and providing service. We want to provide service to everyone, no question. We have an obligation of reliability for our residential members because they receive power from us to survive. In other words, they live in because of the power we provide. Now, business is a little bit different because they're buying power for us to make a profit off of. So again, that's why we treat them a little bit different than the residential member.
So is it possible, you're knowing your system, to maybe highlight areas or draw a circle around this road or that area that might indicate a possibility of like an industrial complex or certain chargers? Is that a possibility?
It's a possibility, but again, it would be a snapshot in time. It'd be to maintain that moving forward, and would be. I would hope it wouldn't mislead someone and get us all in a mess.
Well, that was absolutely the response I thought you would give, and
Yes,
I
sir.
understand
Yes, sir.
because it makes sense.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Price, not to leave you out, or Mr. Paulding, let me ask again. With that knowledge, and with, I guess, what we would like to be able to do you have any suggestions?
Well, first, let me make one distinction between Bob's system and Central. We don't operate the
Right.
radios, so we don't have some of the real-time information that the local co-ops have, which gives us a second layer of blind spots. In terms of what are solutions, I would think that if the EV charging community identified the best locations that, we could collaboratively work together to then maybe possibly rank them in terms of cost. It would take time, but it has to be a collaborative effort between both, because otherwise, his map, is the kind of highlight of the circle, could be great, but in a terrible location for charging. And then, the best charging places may not have the capacity. So that's why I think there has to be a collaborative effort between the stakeholders.
Which I guess this is what we're trying to do now.
Right.
And it's probably about as good as it's going to get, but maybe we can hone it and refine it.
Again, thank you for bringing us into this conversation. We all have to work together to figure this out.
Without
we
question.
all have to.
And finally, Mr. Paulding, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like you fully support cost causation going to the causer. Is that a fair
Absolutely. Matter of fact, we were the first cooperative in the country to go to purely cost-based rates back in 2016. And it was a career move for me. If it had backfired,
You'd be kicking somewhere else.
Well, I'd be doing something different probably, but it is that significant to me in Mid-Carolina to have cost-based rates, volumetric rates. We had to do that for 100 years because all we had was electromechanical meters. All we could do is get a read and have a snap, read here and read there and send them a bill. Didn't know when they were used. But now with automated meter reading systems and those type things in place, you can have some very creative rate designs. Then you can recover your costs without penalizing the cost causer. So cost-based rates is, I wish the entire industry would head that way, and I predict in the next 15 years it will.
We'll see. And I guess along those lines, you are not an advocate of cost shift.
Absolutely not.
Understand. Do you have an opinion on any of those, Mr. Price?
I agree with Mr. Paulding. And we've seen that others are following in Mid-Carolina steps of the other co-ops because they've seen the success that Mid-Carolina's had. And I would say that there are several co-ops who serve large fast chargers today. Another one came online, I think, this week. And they're on demand-based rates, and they've been successful. So, but yes, I'm purely in agreement with Mr. Paulding's cost causation methodologies and principles.
Thank you both, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming.
Vice Chair Powers?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
And I guess my question goes to both of you. I grew up in Marlboro County. You mentioned Marlboro, and the co-ops. Without the co-ops, I think we would have been even further behind years ago when power was more centralized with the bigger places. Have either of your in your positions or any of the individual co-ops showed interest in getting into the fast charger business themselves?
We have not. Like I said, and I'm not 100% sure Cole May can answer that from that side, but from a distribution perspective, Mid Carolina has not, and we're not. To me, that's kind of getting in competition with the folks that really know what they're doing. So I think we're hands off. If somebody wants to come to the table, we'll work with them, try to get it done. But Cole may answer that from a statewide perspective.
Yeah, and I won't speak to any specific co-ops, just, because we're here representing all 20.
Sure.
I am aware that, as I said before, there are co-ops who have worked with third-party DC fast chargers. I'm not aware of any that have gotten into the DC fast charging business, but they have worked with third parties. In one case, they added their own charging station at the same site as a third party. But they're seeking more opportunities based on the demands and the needs of their members to partner with a business, say a Walmart or a hotel, where the host business wants to put in, it's usually level 2 charging, but tackling it that way to get some of the public charging through joint ventures in the community.
Do either of you feel that the rural counties will get the opportunities to have the fast chargers, such as bigger counties certainly will, or that we're seeing already?
In my opinion, it's got to be a need for it. It's got to be a need, and the I-95 corridor I mentioned, that'd be a perfect place to have fast chargers for folks traveling from north to south. But out in rural areas, it would be very difficult for folks to make a business case to be successful when the charger would be very underutilized, in my opinion. Right now, we're still in the infancy of this business, so I'm glad we're having these conversations now. In 5 to 10 years, it may be a totally different scenario, but at this current state of time, it'd be very difficult for a rural area to support, because you got to have volume. They're building large truck stops on interstates for a reason, for the volume. They're not building them on a country road back in Saluda County somewhere. It's kind of the same premise.
Does there seem to be some progression as far as, let's say, farm equipment becoming electric, or has there been any change in that? And I just don't know.
We have not seen it on our territory. The only thing we've seen is a few electric buses that have been bought kind of for demonstration purposes, and those are on it. But those, I just going to address those now. Those are going to create a very significant issue for the local utilities. For example, there's a bus depot down by the airport that we serve, but right now all we got is lighting around just to make sure it's secure. It's over 100 buses in that depot. If they all become electric, a major transmission line and a substation would have to be built at that bus depot just to charge those buses. That's where it's headed if we don't get ahead of it. So
yeah. Well, if school buses go electric, then
that's what I'm talking about.
That's what I was going to ask. Is that bus
school
depot?
buses? School buses, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I should have clarified. School buses.
If they do electric school buses in the rural areas, most of these drivers take them home. I guess they would have to bring them back, plug them in.
Yeah, most of the school districts we serve, they have a central bus depot that they park buses overnight and during the school day. So, and another issue, just kind of a side point, there's a lot of dirt roads in Lexington that are washboarded. It'd shake those batteries to pieces. Just saying. Probably shouldn't have said that, but with practicality of it, we got to address everything. We got to address every issue looking forward. Not against any of it, but let's be practical about it as we move forward.
Sure. And with probably less opportunity, do you think populations in rural counties will be less likely to buy electric vehicles?
I think it's a personal choice, and just like having solar on your house. It's a personal choice, but the person needs to really understand every aspect of it before they, in my opinion, before they pull the trigger and sign that contract. Electric vehicles the same way. If someone wants to buy one, I think it should be absolutely their personal choice to do that.
Yeah.
Wherever the zip code is.
One other thing, when your map was up, it seemed like a lot of the rural counties, which I'm very familiar with, part of it was green, but part of it was white. What is the white part on your map?
That's served by investor-owned other utilities other than the cooperatives. And the way it evolved over years was the cooperatives were formed in the 30s, of course, and late 30s and early 40s. And at that time, most every metropolitan area had service. For example, Lexington had service, Batesburg had service. They fed Lexington and Batesburg along Highway 1, so if you lived along Highway 1, you were fortunate enough to have electricity. But if you lived more than a quarter of a mile, half mile off of it, you weren't. So that's why there's a lot of different colors on the map, and territorial assignments have evolved over the years. So it's kind of a hodgepodge now. It's kind of like Swiss cheese.
So a lot of the municipalities I know, such as Bennettsville, have their own power company.
There are a few electric cities in the state, yes, sir.
Okay, and are they served through Central?
Bennettsville?
Bennettsville
is
is
served by Marlboro, yeah.
Okay.
Marlboro Electric Co-op, yep.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any further, Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. Good morning. It's nice to have some new faces here in front of us. Not that there's anything wrong with the old faces.
I'm not sure what that means. I'm glad to be here.
And it's good to hear some different perspectives as well. So in connection with the capacity maps, it sounds like, for one thing, that would involve additional costs if that were something that were desired, which again would get back to the something else to try to keep out of the cross subsidization. Anyway, it's just my thought. So the directory that you mentioned, Mr. Price, is there anything like that now that helps with whether you talk about economic development or the charging?
I'm sorry. I don't know about outside of the co-ops. I think that concept was somebody from each utility having kind of a go-to. I know in the co-ops, it starts at the local level. They will bring in whoever, if you mentioned economic development, they have an arm for that. Otherwise, they bring in central as required. So generally, it's pretty straightforward, but I think we could designate, an individual at each co-op that would be the focal point in that local community.
Well, my understanding, based on what you said, is that it would be helpful to have a directory that makes it easy for people that are thinking about doing this to at least connect with the right person first, instead of having to go through all of this runaround. Right. Not that it's anyway. So, but what I'm hearing is there isn't anything like that at present. I don't believe, at least not with your two groups. Is that correct?
Not to my knowledge. No.
Agreed.
Okay. So the three-part rate design, Mr. Pauling was discussing that, but I think your background is rate design. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Sure. Well, and Bob alluded to it, but most of our costs to the 20 cooperatives are on that same basis, which is why the three-part rate to me makes sense. We have a production demand charge that is coincident peak-based, a transmission demand charge that's coincident peak-based, and then a basic station charge and energy charges. So that cost, and that is all a blend from all of our costs. We take our costs, we put it in those same buckets, and postage stamp rate to the 20 co-ops. So it's all very much in alignment when he's taking it down to the end-use retail consumer. That cost causation from his level to me, up to our suppliers, down to the residential and business owners in those communities. So supportive.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Commissioner Caston?
One follow-up question, if I may. triggered a thought. I looked at the bill you put up there, and it was small, so I couldn't see it all. But thinking about your rate methodology and your line items that you had relative to like energy efficiency, DSM, or any of those costs, do the electric cooperatives in South Carolina or Mid Carolina have anything such as that?
We have a team that works with our members on energy efficiency, and they talk to them about heat pumps and all those kind of things. And we do some on-bill financing for some different components. So we encourage that. We work with any member that has a question about any kind of what's the payback? Get to a point of diminishing returns when you look at weatherization, those kind of things. But so we try to help our members through all of those discussions.
So you have like a financing portion.
I would have to defer that question to my member services team, but I know that we do some on-bill financing, and whatever the state allows us to do through that regulatory authority on on-bill financing, that we do that.
Yes. So yeah, the cooperatives use Central to do research and development for programs like that, and then they make certain resources available. I know that there's an energy audit team that we employ on behalf of the co-ops to go in and do small businesses. A lot of the co-ops, each co-op is their own unique individual. Let's not forget that. But a lot of the cooperatives have home energy efficiency audit programs, lighting programs, different type of rebates for smart thermostats and other technologies. The OptiWatt is actually part of those member programs that were developed internally and kind of rolled out. Long legacy of demand response, but there's other energy efficiency programs as well.
And how do they fund those? Is that rolled into, I guess, that first cost, the account charge, or?
No, it doesn't have anything to do with the account charge or any of our cost causations. If someone wants a thermostat, we got them. We've got thermostats that actually have our rate program already pre-programmed in them to help manage their own peak usage. We got water heater timers that do the same thing, and we'll actually have an employee to come out and install it for them free of charge on that side of it. But we just charge them whatever it costs for the unit. Most time they pay for themselves. We found most people just rather just buy it off Amazon or whatnot, and it costs, that way we won't have to put $113 on their power bill and recover it over time. But that option's available if somebody wants to do that. And that's from the local level, and again, that's other members not paying for that. That member is
okay. That's what I was trying to get to.
Responsible for their installation.
So you don't have this being maybe cross-subsidized or anything by other members. It is whoever uses it pays for it, and you just kind of help them either pay for it or finance it, or.
That is correct.
Okay.
Some members do offer rebates, but then there's a requirement to participate in the program such that the co-op gets recovery of the rebate through lower energy costs, and then that's it. And that avoids the cross subsidies.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Price, I just want to understand a little bit more about Central, if I can. You referenced in your testimony about I think your comment or phrase was our bulk transmission providers. Mm-hmm. And I know that there's Santee Cooper. Who else would those bulk transmission providers be?
Primarily, we operate in the Santee Cooper and the Duke Energy Carolinas balancing authorities. And so those are our primary providers. We do take some service from Dominion Energy in terms of transmission for certain locations.
So as I understand Central, those bulk transmission providers, they're the ones generating the electricity. You're taking it from them and transmitting it to the distribution co-ops. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. One question I have is, are all of these, is it possible to site some of these charging stations off of a transmission line versus a distribution line?
It is.
Is that beneficial in taking some of the load off the distribution, or what would be benefits of doing that?
It's case by case.
Okay.
I mean, if the location was appropriate, and it's, Bob alluded to it before too, on solar, sometimes it's better to put a load or a resource at the distribution, sometimes it's transmission. It really depends on location, proximity, available capacity. That's why it's so complicated to keep those maps up to date, because there's so many. I mean, we have over 750 delivery points alone, and so keeping track of those in near real time to understand what the loading levels are and how much capacity is available is a challenge.
Okay, I think I'm just kind of thinking about the load that would be used at some of these charging stations, primarily commercial type charging stations, and would it be better to come off of a transmission line versus a distribution line?
In some locations, possibly, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Commissioners, anything further for this panel?
Chair Belzer?
Commissioner Carolee Williams?
Thank you. Gentlemen, good to see you again. I just got a couple more questions, and I want to talk a little bit about the transportation electrification plan ideas. And I think it was Mr. Price who talked about that kind of already happening as part of the IRP. And I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about that, if I remembered that correctly.
Sure. So when we develop our load forecast for our integrated resource plan, we start at each individual cooperative. As the co-ops have seen growth in the electric vehicle sector, they have factored that into their load forecast, and we work with that. We did a joint project with NRECA, Old Dominion Electric, and UC Davis out in California to develop a tool that helps us aggregate DMV data so that we can track the electric vehicle growth in every county in the state. And I think we update that at least annually, if not more than once a year. And that goes into the base forecast of each electric cooperative. And then all of those come together to roll up to the central level. So we have a good idea of how much penetration that we're seeing across the state, and factoring that into our, not only how to serve it through the integrated resource plan, but the IRP also talks about demand response programs and other programs that might be beneficial through working with the EV community to help control and mitigate some of the peaks and everything else.
So that information would be in your 3-year IRP, and it could be updated in your annual updates?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we provide annual updates at this time, but our next IRP filing will be by the end of the year. I think November.
Right. Okay. Excuse me. So as part of what you're saying is that this transportation electrification plan that's been proposed by others already happens as part of the IRP?
I would say a segment of it in terms of the programs, the penetration, factoring in the penetration and growth. Some of the other parts about a TEP were, how to get to local retail rates and make those changes. We don't do that. We are a G&T provider, and we develop the IRP for all 20 co-ops. So those would be local decisions that Mr. Pauling has talked about.
Okay. Did either of you read any of the other testimony that we received?
Yes.
Okay. I think it might be easier if I read something to you. It is from Ms. Perry from Walmart's testimony, and it has to do, I think, with that idea of facilitating the good information and that time is money. And I just wanted your reactions to this. And what she says is, and for anybody who's looking for it, it's page 9 of 14. That's at the top. It's an exhibit. So it's page 30 of 35 in the September 22nd submittal. Admittedly, many of these additional steps are not directly under a utility's control. However, there are ways that utilities can make this process simpler and faster for all customers interested in EV charger installations. For example, utilities can, and there'll be 3 of them, implement shorter turnaround times for utility easement changes and other responses required from the utility. Number 2, create program websites that not only clearly explain the program, but provide helpful information about the process of installing an EV charger from start to finish. And number 3, maintain a list of approved EV charger vendors who are familiar with a particular program. I believe you guys have already talked about the second one, but I'd just like to get your input on that idea of something that the private sector said would help.
I guess we have a little bit of an advantage since we're a small utility compared to the big boys. We have engineers in all of our districts, and when we receive a phone call from anyone, we respond right away. And we will do our best to accommodate what the business wants, whether it be an EV charger or add any other expansion to the business. As far as a list of vendors, I would say that we will, from a Mid-Carolina perspective, we'll probably stay away from that. We may have a vendor list that we would prefer not to deal with because of past experiences, but of course we won't share that either. But it'd be difficult for us to create a program or a process. As far as us, we are responsible for bringing the transformer to the location, and then we have specifications in place of what the user needs on their side as far as the size of conduit, and they'll tell us what conductors they're using, and we'll accommodate all that. So it's kind of a standard specification of what size pad we need and those type things on the utility side, but what they need to do on the charger side is kind of beyond our expertise or even something we want to get involved in.
I hear you on the concern about the approved EV charger list and charge vendor list, and I wonder if it's how similar it sounds to some of the challenges we've had with solar providers in terms of, I think there are lists out there of advocacy steps that consumers should take to be sure they are getting, good information and making as good a decision as possible.
Absolutely. Very important.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioners, anything further? Mr. Torini, any redirect?
No, Madam Chair.
Gentlemen, thank you for your presence here today and your testimony. We certainly appreciate your perspectives and what you've shared with us, and you may stand down. Thank you.
Again, thank you for trying to get ahead of all this. It's coming fast.
We're going to switch to our public witnesses, and our first public witness is Mr. Chip Silverman. Mr. Silverman, would you come forward to the witness table? And I see Ms. Boyd has moved over to the computer. Do you have some exhibits or slides or something? Yeah, I would like to share. Okay. Give you a moment to get set up. This court portal will swear you in.
Just let me know when you're ready and I'll swear you in. Okay, if you'll raise your right hand. Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
And Mr. Silverman, I'm going to ask if you'd state your name, please.
Sure. My name is Charles Silverman, but I go by Chip.
All right, sir. And can you tell us where you're from and if you're here on behalf, who you're associated with?
Of course. I live in Colorado, so I came all the way here to see you folks today, so thank you for having me. I work for FreeWire Technologies, which is a EV charging provider based in California.
Okay. And today, I note that you had pre-filed 8 pages of pre-filed testimony in question and answer format.
That is correct.
And would do you have any changes or corrections to that testimony today?
No, that testimony is still correct. There was also a exhibit there.
And you would like that testimony included in the record?
Yes, Chair.
All right, we will accept your pre-filed testimony into the record as if testified to from the stand. And I believe you had one exhibit attached to your testimony?
That is correct.
Excuse me. Parties I needed to ask, is there any objection to Mr. Silverman's testimony? Hearing none, we'll receive that into the record. And you had one exhibit that looks like it's about 24 pages. Does that sound right?
That is correct.
A white paper, I believe, is how it was termed.
Yes.
And would you like that marked as a hearing exhibit?
Yes, please.
And entered into the record. Any objection to Mr. Silverman's exhibit? Hearing none, Mr. Silverman's exhibit will be marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 2 and received into the record of this case.
Thank you.
Mr. Silverman, if you'd like to proceed with your comments and presentation, you may do so now.
Sure. Thanks. And so what I want to do today is just provide a little more context on FreeWire very quickly, and then really delve into the policy issues here, which I think are most important to all of us. So when we look at the public charging landscape, this is what we see. We've heard level 2 charging, DC fast charging, also known as level 3 charging. And when we looked at this about 7 years ago, which is when FreeWire was founded, we noticed that there were 2 distinct problems with level 2 and DC fast charging, right? So the top and the bottom rows of this chart. If we go down to the bottom row with a legacy or traditional DC fast charger, and we look at the infrastructure requirements in the 3 leftmost columns, we see that traditional DC fast chargers require 3-phase 480 volt power. As we just heard from the cooperatives, this can be a challenge because in rural areas, this may not be present, and therefore that would prohibit fast charging from going into those areas without very costly upgrades to bring in 3-phase power. Now, if we jump back to the top, to the level 2, that works with single-phase 240 or 208 volt power. But if we move to the middle of the chart and the driver experience, we see that it's a slow charging process. People don't have 4 to 10 hours to charge when they're on a road trip, right? You pull in and you want to charge quickly. Maybe you stop, get some food, use the restroom, something like that. But that 4 to 10 hours just doesn't work. And so we designed our product to slot in the middle of this. We offer DC fast charging speeds up to 200 kilowatts, but our product works with single or 3-phase power at many different voltages. We're able to do this because we put a battery inside of the DC fast charger itself. And so the effect of this, if we look all the way to the right on this chart, is from a capital cost standpoint, that we end up somewhere in the middle of a DC fast charger and a level 2 charger, particularly when you consider all of the infrastructure that would be required to bring in 3-phase power, or even if it's present, to extend it. And then from an operating cost standpoint, because we limit our input, given that we have the battery, we are again in the middle. And so that's sort of how we came up with this product about 7 years ago. And this is a schematic of our actual product. And basically what you see, the bottom half of the product, we call it the boost charger, because it boosts the available utility grid power to EV fast charging speeds. And so the lower half of it is a 160 kilowatt hour battery pack. We use the same cells that are in the Nissan Leaf, one of the EVs that has been around the longest and on the roads for the longest. The top half of it is all the power conversion equipment, all the technical details we can go into. We have 2 handles that can charge vehicles, And what you'll see in the temperature chart on the right is basically just our product evolution. We started with a 27 kilowatt input and a 120 kilowatt output. We've moved to a 150 kilowatt output. Now we are at a 200 kilowatt output. And in the next year or so, we will be launching a product that has an inverter inside of it. And what that will allow us to do is use power that we store in our battery to export it back to the grid in an emergency, or to provide the site host, whoever owns the unit, with backup power so that during a blackout they can maintain electricity. Or we could even charge electric vehicles with battery that we've already stored in our battery during a power outage. And so this is just a quick single line diagram of how this works. We, like I said, have a 27 kilowatt AC input. We take that, we convert it to DC power stored in our 160 kilowatt hour battery pack. And then we use rectifiers to convert the voltages to whatever the vehicle requests. And then we have two handles, CCS or CHAdeMO, or what we support right now. It's configurable by the customer what they want. I will just go ahead and state, because somebody will probably ask, we do anticipate adding compatibility with NACS. That was the Tesla-derived standard once that comes out, hopefully in the next year. The big advantage here is what you see at the bottom, and that is just that this technology allows us to offer fast charging with significantly less grid impact. And so I just want to touch on the deployment map here and where we are. Like I said, our headquarters is in Northern California. We also have facilities in Colorado and Texas and the UK. We have about 200 chargers deployed across the world right now. What you'll see on the screen in the map is that the green bubbles are the ones that are currently active. Blue are upcoming deployments in the next year or so. Currently, we have one unit here in South Carolina in Hilton Head, with plans for double-digit expansion in the next 12 months or so, mainly around the Charleston area. We have 13 in North Carolina with a heavy presence in the Charlotte area, and that is also expected to increase significantly in the next 6 to 12 months. And so that's a quick overview of us. I don't want this to seem too much like a sales pitch, and so I want to go right into the policy issues which are most important. And what's really interesting is that, as we already heard today, and we've seen in this docket, that there are some challenges in emerging EV policy that encourage customers to choose technologies and solutions with a higher grid impact. And the ultimate end result of this, we worry, is that electricity rates will increase as a result of vehicle electrification rather than decrease. And the two key issues I'd like to highlight today are rate designs, which you'll see on the left, represented by that chart. Many jurisdictions across the country are deciding to remove demand charges as a means to accelerate the rollout of EV chargers, specifically fast chargers. And while this is a noble goal, I think this is a short-sighted move, because it removes a key price signal that encourages customers to manage their electricity consumption. There's a common refrain that DC fast chargers in particular cannot manage their consumption because the demand for them is inelastic. We don't believe that this is the case. There are technology solutions, but we are seeing regulatory solutions kind of decide that for us and send market signals to companies like us, of which there are others as well, that say, don't innovate anymore. We are going to solve this problem with regulatory solutions. And we don't believe that is a good market signal to be sending. The second one on the right is what has come to be called make-ready programs. These cover the actual infrastructure that is required to support EV charging. Again, as was alluded to earlier, DC fast charging in particular can require a significant amount of infrastructure. And if customers don't have any exposure to the cost, the infrastructure costs of their technology choice, then what are they going to decide on? Well, basic economic principles will tell us that they will decide on the only cost they are exposed to, which is the cost of the charging hardware itself. So here I wanted to provide you with a little context from things that I'm seeing and FreeWire is seeing across the country. This is a quote from Eversource in their grid modernization plans that were filed just a month ago. And again, this reiterates something we've just heard, which is that moving to volumetric rates can be challenging because it discourages consumption, which isn't what we want, right? We're trying to solve a decarbonization problem here. And in order to do that, we need the traditional 3-part demand charge based rate. So this is a little case study here. And what we're looking at is we had our team do some projections on what site load would look like before and after deploying DC fast charging. And so what you'll see on the top here is the energy profile for a site with a baseline of 100 kilowatts that deploys 4 DC fast chargers. These are traditional ones, no battery. This is not FreeWire or another load management technology like FreeWire. And what you can see is that the net load of this site, that means the peak load, right, goes from 100 kilowatts to 331 kilowatts. And you might say to yourself, well, if you're deploying 4 200 kilowatt chargers, why doesn't the site load just get added to 800 kilowatts, 4 times 200? But in reality, we modeled using data that we have from our fleet of over 200 chargers to see what actual EV charging patterns look like throughout the day. And what we've seen is that it's unlikely you are going to hit that kind of cumulative peak of 800 or 600 or whatever the nameplate capacity of the charger is. In reality, you'll see some sort of blend of that. And in this case, like we can see in the top chart, it's 331 kilowatts. And then if we move to the bottom, right, what we see is for EV chargers, we've used ours with a battery in them, but there are other similar technologies as well. And the site load, the net load, in this case, is 117 kilowatts. Again, same conditions, 100 kilowatt peak load before installation of the EV chargers, 4 charging stations, 2 charging sessions per day. That's fairly consistent with what we see across the country in terms of utilization trends, 2 to 3 charges per day at non-Tesla DC fast charging stations. On this slide, what we've done is translate what we just saw on the previous slide, the site loads, into bills. And we selected 4 different utilities across the country, and we chose the applicable tariff based on the demand of the site, right? So that was either the 100 kilowatts for our baseline, 331 kilowatts for our legacy DC fast charging, and 117 kilowatts for our FreeWire or grid-friendly DC fast chargers. And what we can see across all of these is just like I mentioned when I showed you that large chart at the beginning, is that, if you look at the blue scenario, you have the lowest total monthly electrical expenditures. Makes sense. No fast chargers installed yet. Then you move to the middle scenario, the orange one, right? And your expenditures jump dramatically. And then if you move to the right again to the green scenario, you see that FreeWire or other grid-friendly solutions like this end up somewhere in the middle, which was the stated goal when I introduced the technology and what we set out to do, reduce the cost of DC fast charging. And so in short, what I would say here is that without demand charges, customers lack the incentive to try to choose technologies like ours and others because they're not exposed to the cost of it. The cost is the demand charge. Without the cost, they have no incentive to manage their load. And as I said, I wanted to provide you with a little bit of market intelligence from across the country, what's going on now. You'll see that there are a number of states, the ones in green, that have already implemented some form of demand charge alternative. And there are even more, shown in yellow, that are considering this. And I'm here today to, show you, excuse me, didn't hit that yet, that we have some real concerns about this. And I think other stakeholders do as well, as we've seen in this docket. And so I guess my recommendation would be that these rates should be considered carefully. The cross-subsidization should be thought about. And really, the market signals should be thought about. Do we want innovative, market-based solutions to come in and solve these problems? Or are we going to solve these challenges using regulation? So, from a demand charge perspective, that wraps up what I'd like to say there. The next one I will touch on briefly is around the actual infrastructure, which, as we've heard today, the infrastructure is related to the demand charge, but not the same. And another question that was asked about in this proceeding was around make-ready programs and other EV infrastructure rules that help to defray the cost of the infrastructure required to support EV charging and DC fast chargers in particular. And so, again, providing some context and market intelligence from other commissions across the country. This was a proceeding in Massachusetts where the Attorney General intervened and basically said, in short, that widespread deployment of load management solutions can lead to significant savings for ratepayers and ensure that investments in transportation electrification are used efficiently, as well as accelerate the speed at which charging infrastructure can be deployed. Now, these solutions won't be necessarily chosen by customers if they're not exposed to the cost of their infrastructure, either through demand charges or actually having to foot some of the bill for that infrastructure. And so what you see here, this is a schematic from California, and I just want to use this to illustrate what's happening here. And so the dotted line, the dotted green line down the middle of the page, right, represents where the transition between the meter and the customer occurs. Often the left side of this, from the utility pole, right, to the meter is referred to as in front of the meter or to the meter. And these are covered under various infrastructure rules. And, this can include your transformers, your service lines, your service line extensions. And again, this may be covered by the utility. The customer may have some cost share here. It's usually allocated according to a set of rules and regulations. On the right side of the diagram you see here, you see the customer side of the meter or behind the meter. And in many states, not just California, this is covered under make-ready funding. And this is funding that the utility raises funds for, and basically covers everything from panel upgrades to conduit to wire to trenching, and so everything in yellow here. And what you see, as we've talked about, is that the only thing the customer is exposed to is what's in green, or the actual hardware, EV charging hardware itself. And I just like this schematic because I think what it shows is that with these programs, you are removing all price exposure to the customer. Again, economics will dictate that the customer is going to act in their self-interest and not in the interest of the grid necessarily. And if you want the customer to take into account other ratepayers, the grid, state goals, then you need to design policies holistically to take those into account. This is just a breakdown that we have done by one of our engineering firms, showing the customer side of the meter install costs of our boost chargers versus some conventional chargers. We are showing one free wire charger versus 2 conventional chargers because we have 2 output handles on our charger. So we feel that's the appropriate comparison. But again, what you can see is that on average, our install costs are roughly 50% lower than a traditional DC fast charger solution. And so, before I go into the last slide here, I would just say that what we really would advocate for is that things like demand charge alternatives, rate design, make-ready programs to defray the cost of infrastructure are really thought about clearly and deliberated in forums like this, and the cost and benefits really thought about over the long term. And in our opinion, the best solution is to make sure that the customer has an incentive to choose load management solutions, to care about their grid impact. And so we think demand charges on the rate design side do that very effectively. In the event that you are going to, we are going to implement some rates that have alternatives to demand charges, what we would offer is that there still should be a mechanism by which customers are encouraged, given a price signal, to manage their charging load. And we believe that the best example of this has been in New York. New York is a state that has decided to adopt rates with demand charge alternatives. But as you can see on the screen here, the commission was very concerned that doing away with demand charges would also do away with customer incentive to manage load. And so in order to kind of come up with a solution here, I think they are implementing a pretty unique hybrid approach. And what that is they are doing 2 things. One, on the upfront technology cost, right? They are offering a incentive to help defray the costs of load management technologies like ours, because there are additional upfront costs of that. You will see a savings over the long run, but this is kind of their solution to help encourage customers to adopt these technologies because they think there is benefit in having them deployed within their jurisdiction. The second one kind of goes after the operating expense side of this, demand charges, and it's implementing a commercial managed charging program. And this is a performance-based incentive program that awards $1 per kilowatt avoided for any charging that occurs outside of the peak. And again, this is similar in design to a demand charge. So if you have demand charges, we don't think a program like this is necessary. But if you are going to do away with demand charges, we think that this can help to strike a balance between sending appropriate price signals and trying to incentivize additional deployment. And so with that, that's the end of my slides. I would invite questions from other parties or the commission, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Silverman. Mr. Silverman, there are I noticed that some of your slides are included in what you've pre-filed, but there are a number of slides that are not. Do you wish to have your slide deck moved into the record?
Yes.
Okay. I do note that there is a confidential designation on some of the slides. Is that an oversight or because?
I believe that, yeah, that's just an oversight.
Okay.
So I can remove
because they're
that.
already out there right now.
Yes.
So it's kind of gone.
I can remove those.
No, that's
the
okay. As long
notice,
as
if you'd
as long
like.
as we know that they're not. So
It's on our standard slide deck, so I
okay.
apologize.
We're gonna take your slide deck and we'll get a copy of that. I think they can do that from what you've given us. Mark that any objection to putting the slide deck into the record. Mark for identification is hearing exhibit number 3 and received into the evidence of this case. And Mr. Silverman, before we get into questions for you, we've been going about a little over an hour and a half, so we're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back. You're still under oath, so I'm going to ask that you not discuss your testimony or allow it to be discussed in your presence at this time. Thank you. It is 11:40. We'll return at 11:50. Thank you. 10-minute break. Good morning. We are back in session. We are back in session. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Caston, and Chair Belser. And with us virtually, we have Commissioner Carolee Williams and Commissioner Irvin. Our public witness, Mr. Silverman, is on the stand. Any questions from parties? Hearing none. Commissioners, questions for this witness? Commissioner Caston.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning. Thank you for being here all the way from Colorado.
Good morning. Thank you.
So, your presentation, if I understood you correctly, you and I guess by virtue of you saying these things, represent your company, support rate designs that include demand charges, if I understood you, because they don't stifle innovation is one reason. Is that correct?
Correct. We think demand charges convey price signals to consumers that they should manage their load, and without demand charges, they have no incentive to, which for DC fast charging in particular can be very taxing on the electric grid.
And that was the other thing I was going to ask, and you answered it. So thank you very
Apologies.
much. No, that's fine. And also, if I understood, you did not support the Make Ready programs because you say they hide the system cost of new loads. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Finally, you mentioned that the benefits and costs should be considered over the long term, which intellectually I get that, and I get it the way I used to do it in another life, but what can you elaborate on that a little bit relative to this?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that the context of that statement was that the reason other jurisdictions across the country have cited that they are going to implement rates with demand charge alternatives is because they want to accelerate the deployment of EV charging equipment, DC fast chargers in particular, to ease range anxiety for drivers and try to encourage more drivers to buy EVs by alleviating range anxiety. And as I said, I think that's a noble goal, but it's not really addressing the root cause of the problem, right? The root cause of the problem is that these EV chargers, DC fast chargers, use a lot of electricity. Specifically, actually, I should be careful with what I say. They use a lot of power, right? They may not use a lot of energy. And that is the issue. And that is the issue that FreeWire, and there are other companies that try to do similar things, are trying to solve. That they saw a market need, and they addressed it.
Thank you. That helped a lot. Matter of fact, I think you were here when Mr. Pauling and Mr. Price were
correct
giving testimony. And while I didn't hear him say that, it sounds like you're saying something similar, in that noble ideas are good, but proceed with caution and make sure the costs are appropriately recognized and there is a benefit in cost and not cost shift.
Correct. Okay. Yes, I think that's correct. You know, at the end of the day, we don't want to see cost shifts among consumers. And we believe in cost causation and setting rate design according to cost causation. And if you remove demand charges and, you know, introduce things like make-ready programs, you can kind of skew that calculus by skewing customers' decisions. Ultimately, this all starts at the customer. And if the customer is not receiving the proper price signals, or price signals that convey the impacts of the solutions and whatever they choose to do, then they won't make this decisions that we need them to make, frankly.
Okay. And the advantage you're saying to your product is that one, it's either single phase or three phase. You have the option, but you have that quick charge, but not that great amperage requirement.
That is correct. We are essentially buffering the grid, right? We're putting our battery, and it's becoming kind of the intermediary. And so we slowly charge the battery in our charger, and then we fast charge the vehicle. So the driver experience is the same. However, the grid impact is significantly reduced. We're trying to help solve that problem.
Through the technology.
Through technology, that is correct.
Got it. Thank you very much, Mr. Silverman, and safe travels back to Colorado.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioners, questions for this witness? Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. So your company is a technology company, but do you manufacture the chargers?
Yes, that is correct. We manufacture the chargers.
Okay. And you have them in place and operate them and make money from operating them as well. Is that correct?
So our business model tends to be that the majority of what we do is selling the chargers to the operators. The operators in our case are mostly large fuel retailers, convenience stores, and the likes. And the product was really designed specifically with these types of locations in mind because they wanted to offer fast charging, but didn't have the infrastructure to support, what's required for most fast chargers.
Okay. So you said your battery charges slowly. Is that just constant? Is it charging while it's also charging a vehicle? Can help me understand a little bit. When does your battery charge?
Yeah, great question. And so our battery can charge continuously while vehicles are charging, or after a vehicle leaves, right? We can control when our battery recharges. And slowly might be, it isn't the best way to describe it, but it's trickle charging, right? We have a 27 kilowatt interconnection with the grid. And it can do that continuously, or we can even, via software, control that to add additional functionality to curtail recharging during peak demand periods, let's say, or TOU periods. So you can actually further minimize it from 27 down to 0, essentially.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioners?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Irvin?
Thank you. Mr. Silverman, thank you for being with us today. You've been very informative. I'm wondering if you would, are you constantly trying to improve your the battery that goes into your unit in terms of efficiency?
We are, yes.
Making any progress in that regard?
Yeah, so, like I said, we've been around for about 7 years now making this product. And we continue to see developments in terms of the battery technology. We are not producing the cells, like I said. We buy those from Envision, which is the same company that, the same cells that go into EVs, like the Nissan Leaf. But we continue to see efficiency gains, in newer developments, newer products that we release.
And let's say in a winter storm that shuts down investor-owned utility capability to meet demand, are your batteries available to the grid to help cover those shortfalls in demand usage?
Great question. So the as I alluded to earlier, the current product does not have an inverter in it, which means that it's essentially unidirectional. All of the energy that comes into it has to go out through an electric vehicle. However, the next generation of product we are releasing will have the ability to export power back to the grid or to the site host. So yes, in the near future, we will have that capability.
Have you received any interest from investor-owned utilities about incorporating that capability in their grid operations?
I don't want to say too much, but yes, we have been in discussions with many different end users about what the future capabilities could be. I will also note, and I failed to say this earlier, we actually do have a charger installed at Duke's office facilities in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we do work with investor-owned utilities like Duke.
Very good. Let me just shift gears a minute and ask you, what are there any barriers to your company's ability to market and distribute your products in the United States?
Yeah, great question. And so I think that goes back to the heart of why we are here today, right? The biggest challenge in talking to consumers about our product is that when they look at an ROI analysis and they see that they don't have demand charges anymore, let's say, they don't have any exposure to the cost of the infrastructure, they base their decision solely on the upfront cost of the charging equipment. And so that is probably the biggest market barrier we face, is the issues that we talked about today.
So, is my understanding you're using time of use as a way to price the electricity that goes into the EVs?
Sorry, can you maybe add a little more detail?
For example, as the grid has more electricity on off-peak hours, it would seem that your charging fees would perhaps also be adjusted lower for off-peak charging. Is that true?
So because of our business model, where we are not owning and operating the majority of the chargers, right? Charging is set by the owner-operator, and they are free to do as they please. Now, we do offer end-to-end solutions in terms of helping them to design and operate, including by looking at utility rates. And that is something we can recommend to them, but the final decision of how much to charge EV drivers per kilowatt hour is up to the owner-operator.
What about residential charging? Are you offering, or do you have available yet a unit that would service, let's say, an apartment complex, for example, or a place of business like a hospital or a manufacturing plant?
Sure. So at this point, we are focused exclusively on the non-residential, commercial, and industrial market. We don't generally think that DC fast charging makes a lot of sense for residential customers to have at their home. Now, your point about at a multi-unit dwelling, like an apartment building, doesn't, that's very valid. What we've done to this point is place chargers, DC fast chargers, within close proximity to multi-unit dwellings to try to serve the residents of those facilities. And in some states, there are specific grant programs, let's say, that incentivize charger deployment, fast charger deployment at gas stations within a mile or two of a multi-unit dwelling to address that concern.
Are there any grant funds available through the federal legislation, the IRA legislation that would be available to commercial apartment construction to install one of your units, one or more of your units on their premises?
To my knowledge, there are many federal grants available, including from the IRA and bill. I don't know of any that are specifically targeted at multi-unit dwellings. The largest one is the NEVI, the National Electric Vehicle Program, Infrastructure Program, that is targeted at creating alternative fueling corridors to allow for long-distance road trips. Most of the grants that I've seen that focus on multi-unit dwellings do come at the state level.
Are you contracting with local jurisdictions like cities or counties? Have you had any opportunity to market to that particular level?
Yes, we've worked with municipalities before.
I believe you said that are you working with the city of Charleston or the county of Charleston, South Carolina?
Sorry, we have a private client who operates gas stations, convenience stores, travel plazas, and we will be deploying with that.
Thank you very much. Those are all the questions I have.
Thank you.
Commissioners, further questions for this witness?
Chair Belzer.
Commissioner Carolee Williams?
Thank you very much. Good to see you, Mr. Silverman.
Thank you.
I want to ask you a couple of questions about your recharger, some of which you may have covered, but how long does it take to recharge the battery?
Good question. And so I wish I could give you a simple answer, but the answer is it depends on the state of charge of the battery.
Of course.
So, we've done
Let's just say if it were empty, if it needed a total charge, what would that be?
Well, sure. So it's a 160 kilowatt hour battery. We have a 27 kilowatt grid interconnection. And so to refill it, you'd probably be looking at, 4 to 5 hours or so.
Does it discharge completely each time, or does it? I think you've testified that it recharges continuously.
Yeah, it's a good question. And so the battery can recharge, continuously. We also have a minimum state of charge set as a factory default on our batteries, so that there will always be a certain amount of charge left in the battery. It's just to preserve the battery health, essentially. And when the battery does deplete, we go into essentially pass-through mode, meaning that we just pass whatever the grid interconnection is, the 27 kilowatts, right to the vehicle. And so in the event that our battery is depleted, we essentially offer we preserve the ability to charge, but it's going to be a slower charge if we have a depleted battery.
And when I talked about continuously recharging, obviously that I think you've testified that would be based on what the time of use rate was and whether you were in that peak demand period. Is that true?
We have the ability, actually the customer has the ability via software to control when the battery can recharge. So if the customer decides that they don't want the battery to recharge during peak demand periods or in response to time of use rates, then they can make that decision.
And when you talk about that customer, is that customer the end user, or is that the customer who's purchased your device?
Yep, I should have been clear. That is the owner and operator of the actual charging equipment. And generally, in our case, that is fueling retailers, convenience stores, other companies that want to offer charging as an amenity.
Okay. I'm going to switch gears, and I'm looking at your testimony where you're at the bottom of page 3 and going to page 4 where you're summarizing your recommendations. And my assessment is something I don't think I've heard today, which is that you kind of are considering the state of EV charging in the big rates and demand charges and all of the options that are before us over time, and that we're at this, these are my words, but you talk about in number 2, you talk about until its permanent rate design solution is available. Would you talk some, especially about number 2, 3, and 4 that you identified as recommendations to us from an evolutionary perspective, meaning what we need now may be different than what we need when we're at a 50% level, or as the uptake evolves. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. So I think this is a great point that you are raising, Commissioner, and it's basically that the impact that electric vehicles will have on the grid will change as the number of electric vehicles changes. Right now, depending on where you are in the country, it could be anywhere from low single-digit percentage in terms of the number of EVs on the road to maybe mid-teens in some of the higher EV prevalent states. And that those create different needs on the grid. And so when we look at our recommendations, I guess our recommendation would be, as we've heard today from other parties, that demand charges serve a key purpose. And the recommendation is to kind of preserve that, because that sends the appropriate price signal. In the event that the Commission wants to go a different direction and look at alternatives to demand charges, we would suggest that, given the dynamic nature of the electric vehicle market and the fact that the utilization and the adoption of EVs will change over time, that that whatever solutions are chosen should not be permanent. They should be temporary, right? So that the Commission can respond to what's happening in the market. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And so in number 2, are you suggesting that we assess our approved rates every 2 years?
To the extent that there are rates, non-traditional rates, we think rates should continually be assessed. Now, I don't mean a general rate case for all of the utilities rates, but I do mean if there are EV charging or other technology-specific rates those should be reconsidered as the market for EVs changes. Because within the, providing the demand charge alternative, there may be some sort of cross-subsidization. And if that is a risk that we are willing to take for the short term, then it may not be a risk that we want to take in the long term. And so we need to give ourselves the flexibility to, adjust that subsidy over time.
And you note number 2, until a permanent rate design solution is available. Do you have any thoughts as to when we will be there? Is there an amount of EV adoption that will put us to that point where we've got more permanence?
We think demand rates, 3-part rates with demand charges, are a good solution and can be that permanent solution. So I suppose this is all a little hypothetical, right? We think the best solution is to stick with what's been proven and with what the utilities are collectively used to.
Okay, I just thought that maybe suggested that we are at a time of low adoption and maybe some uncertainty of the impact, and that as there's more adoption, we would be able to look at more permanent, more constant ways of managing this. That's what I read into looking at demand charge alternatives to 2-year periods and only until a permanent rate design solution is available, in order to balance the short-term support for a nascent industry with long-term ratepayer interests. Is that the case, or have I misunderstood?
No, I don't think you've misunderstood, but I think what we should be saying here is that we think 3-part rates are a viable long-term solution. And if you're not going to look at alternatives to 3-part rates, then that can be your solution. But if you are going to look at alternatives, you need to factor in the time horizon into when you can move back to a permanent solution like a 3-part rate.
Okay. And I'm trying to get at okay, that's okay. Number 3, impose a maximum load factor of 5% to determine which fast charging stations are eligible for rates with demand charge alternatives in order to target support to sites with lowest load factors and utilization. Tell me more.
Yep. So this again is looking at the demand charge alternative rates that have been implemented in other jurisdictions. Several of those rates incorporate a phased-in demand charge that varies according to the charger's load factor. The load factor is influenced based on the utilization, the number of charges per day, and the total energy that the charger dispenses. And so the issue right now, is that because there are not very many EVs out there, utilization is low. It means charger utilization is also low. And so those charging stations have low load factors because of their low utilization. And so the argument goes that given their low load factors, that these charging stations don't have the same impact on the electric grid as a higher load factor site, like a factory, let's say. And therefore, they should not be subject to demand charge alternative rate, or demand charges, excuse me. They should not be subject to demand charges because of that, right? They would be spending a lot of money in demand charges and very little on energy charges. And the thinking goes that in order to fix that, you need to waive demand charges or modify them. And again, what we're saying here is that we think demand charges serve a purpose to send that price signal. If you are going to modify that, then you should only be targeting your support at very low load factor sites. Because economics allows sites to start recovering more and more of their costs as their load factors go up. And so if the commission deems it appropriate to use ratepayer funds or any other, means of subsidizing, one station's costs, then it needs to be targeted.
Got it. I'm looking at number 4 and trying to figure out what my question is there. And it's really incentives for load management that are equivalent to the relief provided by rates with demand charge alternatives. So the number 4 is that also in the category of number 3, where if we are going to suspend demand charges in that condition, look at these incentives?
Yeah.
Is that the light?
I think.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Commissioner. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I think you've got my question.
I did understand your question, and yes, basically, again, we think that demand charges, in and of themselves, send the appropriate price signals to consumers. So if you are going to continue with 3-part rates that include demand charges, we think customers will receive the appropriate price signal.
Yes.
And therefore, there is no other incentive needed for customers to choose these solutions like ours.
But number 4 says if we haven't done it, to look at implementing incentives.
Number 4 is basically saying we need a level playing field. And so it's saying that if demand charges are waived or modified, then we need something to send the price signal to customers. If there are 3-part rates, we don't think there's a specific load management incentive that is needed.
You may not know the answer to this question, but with your the entities that you sell to that are interfacing with the public and providing recharging, how successful are they at do they offer that recharging at different rates depending on the time of day, and how comfortable are customers with changing rates?
It's a great question. I can't speak for our customers' pricing rationale. What I can tell you is what I see in the market, and that is prices charged to customers per kilowatt hour do vary. And I think customers can understand that if there's a higher rate, then there will be price discrimination. They will look for a lower rate somewhere else, or if there are none, then that's what they will have to pay for fast charging. And I think we see the same thing with ICE vehicles, right? In gas stations.
Mm-hmm. Right.
When you're on a road trip, you can either pay the price per gallon of the site that's closest to the highway because you don't want to drive, or you can maybe drive an extra quarter mile. Maybe there's a site with nicer amenities and, I don't know, in a better location. And so maybe somebody would go there instead.
And I meant to really be thinking about the fact that you might go to a gas station and at 1 hour of the day you would have a certain price, but let's say in the winter, in the later part of the day, you have a higher price. Are customers able to understand and that they could well, first, do your customers charge different prices at different peak times? Meaning, does an individual customer vary their prices during the day? And I realize that's in response to a utilities prices, but I'm just trying to understand how complicated that is for a driver.
Yeah. So when we're thinking about the market, right, and like everything we do is coming from the driver's perspective. And one of the key reasons for incorporating the battery into this technology is that we think it can, the battery can help provide a consistent and reliable experience to the customer.
Yep.
And so the site host, right, the person who owns and operates the charger, doesn't necessarily have to alter their pricing significantly because they're only being exposed to, you know, a lesser, their costs are more constrained, if that makes sense, right? That's what the battery enables you to do. You constrain the costs for actually charging up the battery in our charger, and then you can charge customers a fixed rate without having to respond to TOU periods and so forth. I think from a driver perspective, that does create some confusion, you know, when there are differing rates for drivers.
I'm just looking over my notes. Thank you for that. I think I've covered it. Thank you very much, Mr. Silverman.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any further questions for this witness? Mr. Silverman, thank you for being here, for your presentation, your testimony today. We certainly appreciate your insights and what you've shared with us. Thank you. You may be excused.
Thanks.
I want to take up a little housekeeping matter. Mr. Kuhn, I noted that in the slide deck that was used with Mr. Pauling and Mr.
Price.
Price. I was calling him by his first name, and I apologize for that. That there were some slides in that were not included in the exhibits to Mr. Pauling's testimony. Would you like for that slide deck to be made a part of the record?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you for that.
Any objection from any party? Hearing none, we will mark the slide deck used with the Electric Cooperative's presentation. We'll mark it for identification as Hearing Exhibit 4 and receive that into the evidence of this case.
Thank you.
I don't know how long the next witness is going to take, so why don't we break for lunch now, and we will return at 1:45. 1:45. Thank you.